Ladies and gentlemen, very good evening. Greetings from Shanghai. On behalf of Parasite, I'm very honored to lead this conversation with Mathieu Copeland as a focus on the artist Gustav Metzger in the framework of the exhibition Curtain. It's a great honor for me to welcome Mathieu. Mathieu Copeland is an independent curator. He has been developing a practice seeking to subvert the traditional role of exhibitions and to renew our perceptions and practice of exhibition. And for example, he co-curated the exhibition Voids, a retrospective at the Centre Pompidou Paris and at the Kunsthalle Bern in 2009. And co-edited the famous anthology Voids. And he curated many exhibitions. I just mentioned a few of them. Choreographed exhibition at the Kunsthalle St. Gallen in Switzerland, 2007. Soundtrack for an exhibition, 2006. Gustav Metzger, 2013 at the Musée d'Art Contemporain in Lyon. And also a retrospective of closed exhibition at the Kunsthalle Fribourg in 2016. He initiated and curated the series of spoken word exhibitions that is an ongoing developing project. And Mathieu also directed the exhibition of a film, an exhibition as a feature film for cinemas in 2015, and edited choreographing exhibitions in 2013 and the Anti-Museum in 2017. He is also the director or the editor of the famous anthology of Gustav Metzger writings. That is a really precious publication, but also just the very first volume of upcoming other writings from Gustav Metzger. The reason why I'm extremely proud to introduce Mathieu is also because he was engaged in the Curtain project since the very beginning. Because when from the Rockbund Art Museum, we conceived the Curtain project, one of the very first artists to pop up was Gustav Metzger. And then following some researches, of course, I knew the work of Mathieu, but I didn't expect such deep connection and knowledge with Gustav Metzger. So we decided at the Rockbund Art Museum to invite him as an associate curator into 2020. During the year, that was a very specific one, we managed to develop a series of workshops related to the closure of exhibitions as a history, but also in the context of the pandemic. And we visited a history of key exhibitions that is also related to his project that we can talk about, Mathieu, by the end of your presentation, the Anti-Museum. And so it's really a great pleasure to engage a conversation with him about Gustav Metzger. So Gustav is a key artist of the exhibition in Hong Kong, and he was born in 2026 from Polish Jewish parents, and he escaped and arrived in London in UK in 1939, just before the Second World War, as a refugee under the auspice of the Refugee Children Movement. He lost his Polish citizen and was stateless since the late of the 1940s. He received a grant from the UK Jewish community, and then also had an education background at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Antwerp, Netherlands, between 1948 and 49. So we will talk with Mathieu about the person, Gustav Metzger, but also about his practice. So I invite Mathieu to join this conversation. Just, I will really talk as a friend with Mathieu, but also for the audience, feel free to share some questions. I will try to check regularly the chat message. So we just relax and enjoy Mathieu. So yeah,
Thank you, Larys.
I
Thank you.
think we can start with the person and the artist. As I was very fascinated, also because of Jonas Makers. He had a kind of uh, pr- process of exile, and Gustav Metzger. I see him as a displaced person
Mm.
from life in exile to the traumas of histories to reactions and activism. So I would be happy you can talk a bit more, just to have the framework or the context.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Larry. This is so great to be in discussion with you, and especially in the framework of Curtin and talking about Gustav's art. And as you've articulated these 4 points that we're going to be hoovering over together, I was excited to, yes, indeed, to begin with these notions of displacement and the life in exile, as you've said, and the traumas that really are both at the roots of his art and his life, but also they can be seen as means to inform so much that has been developed and was to grow. So what I thought we should do first together is really to focus on the very beginning. So what happened? What was we talked about action, we talked about activism and art, but let's try to look into where it comes from, how it all fostered, how it all came together. And the first thing I wanted to share with you was that invitation card, which was realized in 1962 for the exhibition at Gallery One, which was the first Fluxus exhibition in the UK, called the Festival of Misfits, organized by Robert Filio and Daniel Spoeri. And even though we passed already the what we will see as being the epiphany of his art in 1959, I thought it was a fitting way to introduce Gustav, in as much as they all come up with a different, precise biography of themselves for that exhibition back in 1962. Robert Filio is a one-eyed, good-for-nothing Huguenot. Robin Page is a Yukon lumberjack. Daniel Spoeri is a Romanian adventurer. And Gustav is labeled as an escaped Jew, which I thought was, well, was both something I very difficult to say, and but also a very poignant way to define oneself, especially for that exhibition that was to have such a long-standing repercussion on the art in the UK, but also in his own personal life. So I really enjoy this idea that we should look at him in as much as that notion of displacement, of it, to escape from one place to another, as you've said, Larry, thanks to the kindergarten organization who actually helped so many young Jewish children escaping from Germany and the looming death on the just before the beginning of the Second World War, reminding us that what was to come was obvious to so many, and thus, you know, everything that had to be taken had to be really diligently carried out. And Gustav, thanks to that program, together with his brother Mendel, was saved from a certain death, which his parents did not escape. Most of his family perished in the camps. And I think it is quite interesting and fascinating to look into the that moment, which is not of a choice, of course, something that was thankfully um, done to him, bringing him to the UK, him becoming stateless, escaped, as they say there. And from then on, he would plant his own seeds throughout the very early 1940s that would grow to develop into the radical artist that we know now. So, and here is Gustav in front of the gallery of Gallery One for the Festival of Misfits, and behind him, you can see the great, wonderful work by Ben Vautier, which the French, well, actually French, Swiss, and Italian, well, European artist who still lives in Nice in the south of France. And that work actually is quite beautiful, not only because Ben would spend the entire duration of the exhibition living in the gallery, sleeping, being there all the time to be seen. But actually, Gustav and Ben would form a very, very strong friendship then, a friendship that would last throughout their life. So now let's go back. And I wanted to start here because, as Larry said, the activism of Gustav is been long embedded, but also it's very interesting how we should be looking into Gustav's activism on a par with that of his artistic legacy and his artistic work. And here is a document that I found as I was working on the book, as you've said, the anthology of Gustav's writing, which was a competition for a sculptural monument to be built by the Trades Union Congress in 1954. So by then, Gustav was a very young artist, just fresh of a long stint of working under his mentor, which was David Bomberg, together here, with many others here in London, where he really sees that as a formative years for him. And it's interesting that this is one of the moments that we can see coming together, both the desire to become a public artist, a public figure, an artist making public art. And we have to know that we are in 1954, so 5 years before what is going to be the breakthrough in his art. And yet here, a very young artist still trying to reconcile his desire to make public art on a par with that of joining the trade, well, not joining, but being part of a trade union movement, which is something that Gustav would have a long-lasting association with throughout his life. To show you a little, to show you, this is, so actually that's the monument, the drawing that we found together with these documents back in Gustav's archive when we retrieved them in the early 2010s, sorry. And that's a drawing. And so here is a very early sculpture by Gustav that he made in the mid-1940s. And,
so at the beginning, he had the practice of sculpture.
Yes, he started as a sculptor, yes, indeed. He, I mean, but interestingly enough, one would say that it both did not last long, and then all of his art should be seen under the prism anyway of three-dimensional, as we can see a bit later on. But you can see here really a look into sculptures. One of his first acts when he decides, so in 1942, 1944, he really questions himself, his own legacy, not legacy, sorry, his own upbringing and where he longs to become. And what he says is, should I become a professional revolutionary or an artist? And he decides to become an artist, and his first task as an artist is to go and see Henry Moore, the artist, and ask to be his assistant. And Henry Moore famously told Gustav, well, first of all, you need to go and study. So, you need to do a fine art course. And that's why he would then start his fine arts and his studies. And
would you say that from this sculpture practice, there is a connection? I mean, from the beginning, connection with political challenges and engagement with the social challenges?
Well, I would argue you could see that in every art, and when you know the path that he was to undertake, we could assume so. But also, we are confronted here with the work of a very young man who's really searching for himself. And so I guess there's also that great desire, that great longing to become an artist. And as you can also study when we look into his early paintings that you realize in the late 1940s through to 1959, well, one could argue that most of them would not have direct significance or relevance to the social political climate that he was living under. And yet, as a young man, he was experiencing difficult times, and that cannot be not seen in his art. So I guess it will always be underlying, especially at that time, but it will not be apparent or as obvious as then it becomes as from 1959 onwards, as we will see. But also it's quite interesting that what your question here, because he has an ongoing and a very strong growing into his desire to have an art that really exceeds boundaries. And as I've said, he was his mentor was David Bomberg. He was studying with him at London's Polytechnic together actually with fellow students, including Leon Kossoff and Frank Auerbach. So you can see really what the seeds of Bomberg would actually grow into later on. And yet, nonetheless, what you have is Gustav and David Bomberg coming to a very difficult, powerful halt in their relationship in 1953, and Gustav moving out of London to go and live in King's Lynn. And here we can really look and start his development into a very thorough activism, as exemplified in his early activism that he has. So he moves to King's Lynn in the east side of the country, and there he becomes extremely involved in the local politics. Especially here, I highlighted that text that Gustav wrote and really campaigned for, which was against the destruction of the north end of a section of King's Lynn, the town that he was living, in order to make path for development of a road. And there he was arguing and campaigning against the destruction of a whole site of the town, which was the host where the fishermen were living, for instance. So therefore, really taking the side of the workers here again, as we've seen with the trade union monument. So this is a really gradual process that we have in Gustav's upbringing and development. And from the local activism, it goes fast into the national activism by joining Bertrand Russell in the Committee of 100, where actually it is Gustav co-named that the Committee of 100, which was an anti-war, anti-nuclear organization, for which actually Gustav will be arrested and sent to jail for nonviolent activism. And so here is Bertrand Russell in the middle of the picture there. And here I've selected two documents that we found in Gustav's archives. So really something that he had there, something that shows his belonging to the group. And even though he did not contribute to the writing itself, he actually contributing to the design of the posters and some of the leaflets. So, but his engagement is without compromise. And I wanted to show you that the policy of the Committee of 100, which is a fascinating document, which reads, "We stand for nonviolent direct action. We have found that peace and freedom are inseparable. We do not believe on frontiers. We believe that conflict situations are our responsibilities," and so on and so forth. So really that activism, which is, really thorough, it would be in the, I'm sorry, my dear?
It's very stunning to read this text that is also very contemporary.
Yes, yes, and there you really see the, his activism coming to life, really coming to fruition, something that really comes and becomes. But what is fascinating is that between 1953 and 1955-56, for several years, he stops making art and really focuses into that. And then his gradual return to making art would be first in organizing exhibitions, including a very early one with Paolozzi and Hadwell and a couple of others. And then an exhibition also, which has been quite interesting to him, which is studying the destruction of art during the Reformation in England, which is the first moment that Gustav actually names or uses the word destruction in 1956, through to him coming back to painting, but then at a radical pace, something that he had not experienced up to then, that will lead to his first experimentation in his studio in King's Lynn of what will become autodestructive art. So let's jump into the second part, which is the raw materiality in Gustav's art. And as you've highlighted, Larys, the thrash newspaper, acid glass, and autodestruction. So at that key moment of 1959, it really comes to that development in his work, which is to really uses some of the techniques of the that he has reached in his art, in as much as working directly on the fabric, trying to affect the fabric, trying to affect the materiality onto which he works. One of his last works on physical works in a more classical understanding of what objects were up till then. We can find, for instance, his work on metal plates, on steel plates, where he tried to scratch paint directly onto the plates and really attack the surface, which would lead to that first moment in 1960, in June 1960, where he claims a new movement in art, which had its first demonstration in New York last with John Tingley, will come. And so he invites to his first lecture demonstration at the Temple Gallery. And here we can find Gustav for his first presentation of autodestructive art. So, as I've said, 1959 is the key moment when he writes the manifestos and he put it out into the world. But that's not until that moment in 1960 that becomes a public event, an action of public art, so to say. And I wanted to start with that image before we go straight into an analysis of the materiality or the rawness of the materialities embedded within his work. Because in that photographs, we see everything that we will see in the future in the entire development of his work. And first and foremost, I want to bring your attention to the newspapers at the back of that photograph. And when I asked him why the newspapers on the wall, he said to me, and we have to understand that the entire room is covered with the day's newspaper. And the reason why he told me, he said, I wanted to insist that this art was about now. This was made in the day. This was in the present. And what to show the present better than the newspapers that actually printed of the days. And I was extremely fascinated by that knowledge of what mass media represent and how he can use them as an artist. And as we will see at the end of our elocution together with Larys, we will see that this keeps cropping up throughout his entire life.
Yeah. And you told me that he has a passion for newspaper.
Yes, absolutely. He was an avid collector of them, and goodness gracious, you could not find him in the street without a bag filled with the newspapers, especially the free one, like the Metro and what have you. He would take them all. Whenever you would visit him in his house, he would ask you to bring the day's newspaper as well, in order to really feel himself. But as we'll see, this really becomes, as we can see actually right now, this is part of his art. This is part of his of what he believes to be the I think both a source, but not a source of truth, unmediated truth. You would see and you would try to find within that a representation of the power and the bias of power. And
so can you precise when he talk about autodestructive art as a practice? What does it mean? We see some materials on the picture.
Yes,
is it about destroying, or is it about covering or melting? Can you explain a bit more about this?
Absolutely. So here what you can find is behind Gustav, there is a white sheet of nylon, which is stretched. Well, during that conference here, he would organize one of his first public piece of autodestructive art, onto which he would spray acid onto that white piece of fabric of nylon, and gradually, slowly, the acid would dissolve the sheet of nylon behind him. So very much for him, the piece of autodestructive art, as he would then furthermore develop them, is a gradual process that is enabled by the artist, but then really follows its course in a generative process. The second one you can see on the table is, if only we could point with our fingers, we were together, I could show you. Can you see it behind the glass of water on his table? There is that little model, with three planes.
Yes.
Well, this was his first model for an autodestructive sculpture. And that was a model that he did made of, and he wanted that to be done in steel, installed in the outside, you know, so on a granular scale. And then as the rain, as it started, you know, the element of the weather would occur, the rain and what have you, the sun and all the corrosiveness of life, so to say, and nature, it would gradually start to decay the metal that autodestructive monument would be made of. And slowly the sculpture was just completely disappear with time. So again, it's about setting up a process that then follows its own path, that is really that evolves on its own time. Even though Gustav defined the moment of autodestructive art between 20 seconds and 20 years, 20 seconds being, you know, the moment when the first acid hits the nylon, and 20 years being that moment of a generation, as we know.
Mhm.
The two other elements which are interesting, because we'll come back to that later, is can you see that big stack of metal on the next to the table?
Yes.
Well, what he did with that is just threw it on the floor. And the reason why he threw it on the floor is to highlight that one of the aspects of autodestructive art is music and sound. And by throwing all that metal on the floor, generated just an auto-destructive sound. So a sound of a moment as done by the art. And then the final one before we move on into the manifestos, which is the core of his art, is that bag next to him. You can see the bag next to him onto his right, sorry, our left.
Mhm.
It was a bag that he found in the streets of London, which was in front of a tailor shop. And these are the leftovers of tailor, you know, just cutting off fabric and throwing off the fabric in a plastic clear bag. And what he said to us was that here he saw a perfect work of art. Everything was there, shape, color, all that defines a work of art, and that the artist had nothing else to do but to choose it, as he actually will write in one of them in his third manifesto. It will be the most beautiful art is being produced on the streets of London.
So if I understand the practice of autodestructive art is also to generate something else that could
Well,
be
that's
a
you're absolutely right.
experience, but also a sound and so on. So it's not on because Gustav was very active in and a kind of anarchist.
Mhm.
So I don't know how could you relate auto destruction and maybe construction in his
Thank you. That's perfect. Look, so here let's go straight into the third manifesto. So in 1959, he writes the first manifesto entitled Autodestructive Art. The second one was Manifesto Autodestructive Art, and the third one is exactly what you've just said, Larys. Autodestructive art, machine art, auto-creative art. So therefore, there's that understanding that one cannot go without the other. That there are two part of the same coin. You know, they're two sides of the same coin. His joy is to create. And you know, here is a little line, for instance, from the second manifesto, where he says, "In the evening, some of the finest works of art are produced, now are dumped on the street of Soho." So you see, produced and dumped, creating destruction. And then he goes on to the sorry, that was the third manifesto. So really, auto-creative art is an art of change, growth, and movement. Auto-destructive art and auto-creative art aim at the integration of art with the advance of science and technology. And here we really come to the that necessity, and that's where I'm very grateful to all that you proposed, Larys, which is that the rawness of the material. And here we can see already in the second manifesto, where if in the first manifesto, Gustav really put forward this notion of what is auto-destructive art. And as you've said, I mean, the opening line tells you everything. Auto-destructive art is primarily a form of public art for industrial society, and the art that that made for that time. And yet in the second one entitled manifesto autodestructive art, it comes into defining what could be the material, the rawness, the raw material that are at the core of that making of an autodestructive art. And I really admire looking into all the accumulation of materiality that Gustav proposes, that encompasses acid, adhesives, ballistics, canvas, casting, clay, combustion, compression, concrete, corrosion, cybernetics. I mean, think about that. 1960, talking already about cybernetics in art. You know, the famous show that will not happen until 1969 at the ICA. And it is, well, I will come back. And it is quite interesting that actually the curator of cybernetics serendipity at the ICA, Yasha Reichart, was introducing Gustav in June 1960 for the first demonstration, as we can see here in the invitation. So, you know, there's no serendipity, so to say. Combustion, compression, concrete, corrosion, cybernetics, drop, elasticity, electricity, electrolysis, electronics, explosives, feed explosives. Of course, there we can see directly the link between Gustav and Jean Tinguely, which has been studied again and again, and which is a great source of inspiration, because, you know, when Tinguely does the homage to New York, it is literally at the same moment when Gustav composes his manifesto for autodestructive art. Feedback, music, glass, heat, human energy, ice, jet, light, load, mass production, metal, motion pictures, natural forces, nuclear energy, which is fascinating for an anti-nuclear activist, paint, paper, photography, plaster, plastics, pressure, radiation. Look, radiation, we are what, 8 years before the radiation pieces by Robert Barry. And not to show that it was a precursor, but to show the long legacy that it will have. Sand, solar energy, sound. Again, and as you said, you know, in his first autodestructive manifesto, where he added that beautiful line, the amplified sound of the autodestructive process can be an integral part of the total conception. Again, so you see, I'm really fascinated by this overview and of all the possibility of materiality that can be used into the making of an artwork, which here is both informed by his own research, his own understanding of the time, but also trying to see how all this contributes to destruction in art.
Yeah, it's very fascinating because during the 50s and early 60s, very few artists were concerned not about the production of an object, but really this process of engaging with the raw materiality of what you just listed. And I believe he was not obsessed with the making of a visual object, but more engaging with questions that some processes generated by the materials can engage the society as a collective and as an individual. So it's really interesting.
Absolutely. And Luke, may I invite you to look at the last line of the first manifesto, which reads, autodestructive paintings, sculptures, and constructions have a lifetime varying from a view moment to 20 years, as I've said earlier on. And then come the pinnacle of that. When the disintegrative process is complete, the work is to be removed from the site and scrapped. So even when the process is over, there must be we mustn't keep the leftovers. There should be no fetishization of the process itself. The process is not to generate an object that we then show. No, it has to be scrapped. And I think this is really a key understanding, as you quite rightfully say here, of that desire not to produce an object, but to produce a moment, an event, to generate a philosophy. And that's why these art of manifestos, as we could call them, especially through the five, one devoted to autodestructive art, are so fundamentally important, because they really both announce and encapsulate and also exemplify. what is autodestructive art. They could even be read as scores, so to say, but also as a means for him to develop and further his political and activist agenda. And may I just invite you to look at, this is the fourth manifesto that Gustav wrote during the Festival of Misfits, as we've seen when we were at the beginning of our allocutions today. And that manifesto is just beautiful because it's not only a manifesto for about the autodestructive art, but also it can be read really as a testimony of an artist at that time, where he really pushed forwards and even writes in poetry somehow. You know, I mean, look at the opening line of that manifesto: everything, everything, everything. Isn't that great? I mean, you know, he goes beyond, and then he hovers between an analysis of the current situation and the current art moments of the time. The third paragraph is an analysis of new realism, and Gustav had a great admiration for the Nouveau Realiste. You know, hence the collection with Daniel Spoeri again from that I was talking about earlier on. I've spoke at length about Jacques Villegley's and Gustav's ongoing relation between one and the other. But look at that, he also goes further. And one of his understanding is saying that, you know, nothing must be saved, nothing must be preserved, everything has to be scrapped. He's also a conscious blow to the art system, and especially the gallery system, that he really despised and he refused to engage with throughout his life until his death. And here we have the conclusion of the third paragraph is for me one of the strongest lines ever written about that. And here is how he talks about galleries. You sticking fucking cigar smoking bastards and you scented fashionable cows who deals in work of art. I mean, how beautiful is that? How violent. How was such a great one-to-one confrontation. And again, Gustav will come back to that, you know, at length, and especially in 1974, when he will come to propose an art strike for artists to stop making art as the ultimate blow to the commercial of art system. And here is the final fifth manifesto on random activity, transforming works of art. Transforming works of art is the title. And again, this is that belief, this is that understanding that it's all to come, it's all to be transformed.
So Mathieu, can you explain his connection or no with different movements at that time? Was he engaged with a community of friends, and was he part of some of the movements? And in the same time, individually, he is very productive into texts and manifesto. Did he engage other artists around him?
So that's very interesting. He really tried to create a community around him, and he took part in many communities. And you know, I mean, we can see here, for instance, the fifth manifesto is published in Signal magazine. So Signal that he joined at the he was part of the creation at the beginning, together with David Medalla and Guy Brett and others. So here we can see an artist really not. He was not a loner, not a lonely figure. It was within the fabric, the art fabric, the art worlds, we would say, in our fabric of the time. And for instance, in that same issue of Signal, Signal number volume 1, number 2, he also writes a text on David Medalla, on David Medalla's art, and called Five Bubble Machines. So here you have an artist who's engaged with this community, who writes about art that is at the fringe of the avant-garde of everything happening. Just before that, he would meet Fontana. So it's interesting to have that link, you know, the great genealogies with artists, and he was also very, very well connected, very well known, with a great knowledge of that all. Again, you can see his activism and years of studying coming to there. You know, he often spoke to me about the day when he met in Rimini, but from Popper and Pierre Restani and many others. And so yes, he was very much involved with many different movements, as we've seen with Fluxus during the Festival of Misfits. But he always took a very active point in not joining any movement. in deciding to really remain out. And I remember a conversation we had together with Gustav and Alison Knowles, Alison being there at the Festival of Misfits back in 1962, where, and he said to her, I was not Fluxus. I was never Fluxus, even though Matunus would have loved to, and kept on sending him memorabilia of Fluxus that he created. And we also have a most beautiful little card designed by Matunus of Gustav Metzger's name. So here we can see a great ongoing legacy, and him being on the peripheral vision, outskirts, you know, always there but never there. For instance, let's focus for another instance on another moment on Signal, which is there when it's a magazine, where it's about diffusing culture. And actually, at the end of that magazine here, Gustav was meant to edit the next issue of that newspaper, news sheet, Signal. But when Signal becomes a commercial gallery, he quits all activities with them and steps out. So refuses to engage furthermore at that time. And I mean, he would still support and be very close to both, especially to David Medalla throughout the years, as we can see in 1972 when they have an exhibition at the ICA, not a joint exhibition, but a two-person solo shows at the same time. So yes, he was. And here is another example. I've used the word, I mean, I read one of his words, which was in his manifestos really highlight the need of science. And Gustav saw the work with scientists, and especially the science of his time, you know, the research as they're being carried out as essential to the development of his art. And here is the invitation to the first presentation of the art of liquid crystals, as he would come up with. And here is the invitation, which is quite beautiful, because he also announces him inviting Frank Popper to come to London to give a lecture on his art and on this idea, a lecture that actually I included in one of my books on Gustav, where you have Frank Popper saying like Jean Tinguely and Gustav Metzger are true revolutionaries, and trying and doing an analysis of the notion of being a revolutionary artist, you know, leaving everything behind. But what's beautiful about that is really the art of liquid crystal come from Gustav studying and looking into the science of his time and seeing on the cover of Scientific American liquid crystals, which he did not know what it was until then, seeing the color and what it can generate. And here is the final achievement of the art of liquid crystal in 2013 with the piece, which is the most monumental piece of liquid crystal Gustav created, that I produced for the exhibition I devoted to his auto creative art at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Lyon in 2013, and which comprises of 7 very large scale and by screens as an invitation for us viewers to lay down on the floor and on, you know, on the beautiful darkened environment and just lose ourselves in the ever-changing colors made by heating up and cooling down the liquid crystal, creating an unpredictable pattern of light, color, and forms that evolves both randomly and to a script. The script is just when it is cooled down and when it is cold. But that's all. You cannot predict which color or which shape you're going to have. I think a beautiful incarnation of a generative work of art, in the word of Brian Eno.
So it's important to precise it is not about the projection of video or slideshow, but it's really the process of inserting on the slide machine the crystals that are reacting according to the temperature, right?
Absolutely, yes. He worked for a long, long time. The first one was realized for his first retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art in Oxford, where he finally, because when he presented him at the beginning, he was tries, and then he famously tried it out when Pete Townsend invited him to do a liquid crystal environment on projecting on the band, The Who, and it was a 2-evening event which featured the Cream, the Move, and the Who in a 2 evening. So the first evening was a great success, and unfortunately, for the second evening, there was a power failure. So when the Who played, they mostly played in the dark, unfortunately. But it was to really show the social implication of a work of art that is not also just about the physical visual aspects to it, but also how it can be implemented in society, and
Mhm.
how, as we know, this will kind of create such a great trope in psychedelic, um, um, well, light shows, as simply as that.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Unveiling the veil,
Yeah.
I think, is also something very important. Also, maybe if you allow me to ask a question related to the curtain exhibition in Hong Kong, thanks to you and the estate of Metzger, uh, we can show two major pieces of the historic photographic series, one related to the Second World War and the other related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the visibility or the invisibility of the photos are related to the fabric covering the image. Just before we go on, would you position these artworks in this autodestructive eye? Because there are also other photographs he produced and sealed in between two metal uh, plates. And yes, this one, for example. And how would you position the works exhibited in Hong Kong?
Well, that is beautiful. Thank you, Larry. I mean, first of all, I think this is what makes really Curtain Project such an important show. That understanding of all the of all the understandings of what the curtains are, especially in the time we live in, where we can see where we too many erections of curtains, and whereas we should really use curtains to go through. Here we have a very interesting moment in Gustav's evolution in art, which is, we have to look into one of the key texts that accompanied the development of this work, the historic photographs. And this is this one, The Exclusion of the Spectator in Art from 1996, the same time where Gustav produces the historic photographs, including the two ones that you guys are showing so beautifully in Hong Kong at Parasite. And I think what is really interesting about that development here is to think about the philosophy that leads an artist known for auto-destructive art and auto-creative art to come to this something which is more of the creation of an object, so to say, but an object that withdraws himself from vision, an object that hides itself, an object that really um, puts an emphasis onto the spectator and purposefully excludes him from the experience of the artwork, or really makes him challenge and struggle for that experience, which is such a breakthrough. I mean, it's a revolutionary understanding of what arts are, art objects are, that really feeds into what is then to become participatory art, or an art with a great deal of emphasis on participation. And as Nicola himself said, being a fourth precursor to relational aesthetic, because what is it if not to have a relation to an aesthetic? However, what is fascinating here, as we started looking into Gustav's art, it was that relationship with newspapers and the mass media and the imagery that it created. And there you have a complete follow through to what Gustav has always been looking at, which is the power of the media. The media has a represent realities, and trying to seize, these moments and give these iconic images, the iconic incarnations, a new life, a new art experience. But here, by trying to furthermore looking and thinking about that, what is the position of the spectator? Who are we as spectators when we experience a work of art? What is our relationship with the evolution, with the movements, with the art itself? Are we just passive consumers, or are we active participants? And there you have really I wanted to show you that little, it's a pre-final proof for the publication of The Exclusion of the Spectator in Art, where you can see Gustav really touching up finally the text itself. And what does it start with? Nothing, clin, le vide, an exhibition viewed from the outside. And again, Armand de Maria, Ben, and so on and so forth. So here we have nothing is a state, and nothing's forever. And nothing does not exist, as Ben Butch's mother said, nothing is no thing. And here we have a kind of a further analysis to the reality of a work of art. If with autodestructive art we spray acid onto the nylon and thus the nylon disappears, what if I conceal the vision of the image to be seen and thus withdraw the possibility of the experience? Especially with that work here, taking one of the iconic images of the Hitler Youth, and really a powerful image of Hitler parading in front of the Hitler's youth. And you have to remember that one of his early traumatic experience by Gustav when he was still living in Nuremberg was that he went to see a Nazi parade. And he came back ever so excited because he was taken by that spectacle. And of course, his family, especially his father, had a very violent reaction to him and gave him a slap. He was a very, very young boy, we have to remember. He was 12, 13. But, him just being in awe and by that spectacle. And here, many years later, in 1996, 1997, revisiting these imageries that has now become elements of our cultural fabric, elements of our horrific past, but still circulating and luckily circulating so vividly and widely in mass medias. Here, working directly with that material of that time and withdrawing aspects to them. So unfortunately, I did not include the photographs and I wished I did not have them, I'm afraid, but here are two images of the work that you guys are showing right now. And again, I love them for what they are. That here is the work of art, but the work of art is nothing without the participation of the spectator. We are the direct insight into the experience of the moment.
Yeah, I think also the retrieval of the image is very interesting in the process of looking or watching or experiencing. Is related to also I'm fascinated by the concept of the obscene that is not right in front of us uh, on the stage or in the exhibition space, but something that cannot be formulated, or something that could be a trauma, or something that can be also excluded or forgotten. So I think this kind of work is also the reason why we really wanted to show it in Hong Kong, because it resonates also with a lot of different contemporary global contexts.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And back in 1965, during his influential conference at the Architectural Association in London, he actually highlighted a concept which for me is a key concept of his development and his art, which is the aesthetic of revulsion. The aesthetic of revulsion, which is, when you talk about the obscene, could not be any closer to that. This is really confronting oneself to something that really makes us as spectators at ease, presenting what we consider the uncanny and so on and so forth. But I mean, it is quite beautiful when he says about the historic photographs. In 1996, when he really tries to come up with a thorough analysis of them, and he say people can pass by, think about them, and connect with the reality portrayed. He really sees the different steps, the different times. He really, as he says, the viewer is faced by choice. A large number of possibilities are opened up. You do not need to engage if you do not want to engage.
Mathieu, I think we are reaching our time slot, but if if we have time, we can still take 5 or 10 minutes.
Well, I think you're right. Let's conclude then, as you've said, and very briefly with this recontextualization and the idea of, as you quite rightfully put forward in the all of you in the exhibition curtains there, how we can really look into the contemporary shift in geopolitical understanding. And I just wanted to show you, so this is Gustav towards the end of his life, and here again engaging with the youth, we're engaging with young students in our programs, and here with the work again dealing with mass media and newspapers, again dealing with what is at the roots of the historic photographs, images acquired from mass media and blown up to a scale that cannot be experienced, so to say. And here is an invitation for us all to seize the materiality of newspapers and really start to organize them as we see fit, and especially here according to the main tropes that Gustav had proposed, and especially, as you know, his life has been a lifelong struggle, fight against extinction, against mass extinction especially, and with a great ecological underlying and the tone. And I just wanted to conclude with this really key aspect to his art and to his life and to philosophy, which is the necessary battle uphill that we are all fighting as a fight against extinction, against the death of nature, as we can see in this final slide, and really the need for both a decolonial ecology, as we can see here, and a radical reappraisal of the ecological stance we must absolutely all foster.
Yeah, I think this recontextualization is also important in the project of Curtain. That's also why we had no kind of obstacle to connect the work of Gustav Metzger with other works that can really connect with the importance of the artistic gesture today and the value of it in order to resist any form of oppression and authoritarianism. And I'm thinking also of a few artists in the exhibition, like the one Robert Temesgen from Ethiopia. There is in the Soho House this large photograph print of people in the street reading the journal, but he had this project uh, to develop a series of newspaper that is handwritten and only one copy according to the different topics he's raising. And the strange thing is that the newspaper he's explaining is made of acid. So it's a newspaper coming from the government and the propaganda, but people are using the newspaper like Metzger was using to paste on the wall of the houses, and so he was really revisiting this practice of information, but also in the context of Asia, there are so many artists like Teresa Hakchunta and also Cesar Cruz Bacani developing photographs related to this act of life. I think maybe to conclude, we can say that Metzger is really connected to life and not only like destruction for destruction. So it's about caring and solidarities and of course formulating as we can what we feel. So thank you very much, Mathieu. I'm very happy to have this conversation. I don't know if the audience have some questions you can drop. Um, if no, I think we can finish here our conversation. I read a question from Cecile. I'm not very familiar with Gustav, so I don't know whether this would be an obvious question. I would like to ask, how does he define or see himself in the context of the spectacle and spectator relationship? with mass media.
Well, that's interesting because it was an artist making these works in relation to context of exhibition, of public presentation. So there is always that knowledge of the spectacle and the society of the spectacle, to take it quite bluntly and on face value. So there's this knowledge really of making art, of really creating a work of art, and however trying to really further this understanding of mass media, and really also bringing forward that possibility of yeah, making art with them. I had prepared the the word that I was concluding, that I was showing towards the end, which is when he invites the audience to cut into them. It's a work that really finds its origins in an exhibition that he did in 1972 at Gallery House in London, which at the invitation of Stuart Brisley and Mark-Amy Kamowitz, who were also exhibiting on two floors below. And here it says he used actually the word that he uses to describe this early work, this early incarnation of the work that we've seen, is controlling information from below, controlling information from below. And let me just allow to read you a little part, which is, it is vital to contain the volume of information that is hurled at us. By analyzing and critique of this information, one moves towards some form of control, so as to regain control. A large number of newspapers from different countries, magazines, and learned newspaper journals will form the basic materials of this section. The visitors is encouraged to manipulate this material by cutting up, rearranging, writing comments. There will also be TV, radio, and tape recorder. So there's really that notion of not only presenting, but inviting to participate within and with. So I think that's one of the key understanding of the context that he really thinks and sees for is well, I guess his relation to and with mass media, which is pretty much the same as ours all, even though exacerbated in our times.
I mean, the situation today, and that's also why in the curtain we extended the materiality of the curtain to the surface of the phone, of the computer, that are our contemporary curtains. Okay. So thank you very much to you, Mathieu. Thank you very much to each of you from the audience to be available to share this conversation. I hope you enjoy, and please visit the exhibition curtain in Parasite and Soho House. Thank you so much. I wish you a very beautiful evening. Have a bon appetit, have a good dinner, and hope next talk. Okay?
All right, thank you, Larry. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.